Welcome to the Alpha Build Podcast. Today we're going to talk about in-game difficulty and boss battles.
Yeah!
It's all about getting hard and dirty.
Like, all
dirty
up in
and
there
hard?
deep. Yeah.
In a very clean and game-like manner.
Oh, okay, so no innuendo? No bad
Exactly.
language?
No digital
Ah.
BD.
There's no, none of that. None of that. This is completely clean and child-friendly, despite how hard.
Even though children shouldn't play video games, they'll rot their brains.
Exactly.
Man, my brain is so rotted at this point. Yeah.
So, if we're talking about boss battles and we're talking about in-game difficulty, lots of ways we can go on this one, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit in our past podcasts. But I think the first thing that maybe comes up that we're gonna start with a bold question, which is: do games even need boss battles? Are they something that we have to have, or like what would games be like without boss battles? Can games exist without boss battles? And are we doomed to always have every game end with some kind of a boss?
I personally wouldn't play... I don't like many games without boss battles. Might as well be a Facebook casual game at that point.
The darn casualers.
Well, that's not it. It's you want to feel like what you learned and what you've developed over the course of the game feels like it means something. And that's what that boss battle does. And without it, just kind of strips that meaning away.
So, but I guess a lot of people will equate it to saying that a boss battle is like the final test after a semester of school. And then equally so, I know people that would argue that, there's a lot of classes that don't do final exams, and that maybe the summation of that final level, just you getting through it, is kind of like, I guess if you don't do a final boss, you at least have to have a really challenging final level or something.
Yeah, but you could almost consider that a boss in itself, right? I mean, it's...
Well, I guess that's what the discussion's about, right?
Yeah.
Is it or isn't it a boss in just another form?
I would say it is. To me, that I thought that was understood.
Yeah, and then another question comes up is is the idea of a boss really only pertinent in a game that is about mechanics, in a game where you have mechanical challenges? I take a game like Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, and it's a great game, and I don't want to spoil anything, but there's kind of a boss, but not in the traditional sense.
No.
It's like it's not really any more to me challenging than anything else you see. The game's pretty consistent in its challenge level all the way through. It's more that you're wrapping up the narrative.
Yeah.
But that game is amazing. People love it. For a narratively driven game, does it have to actually have a boss? Is that important? I don't know.
No, I think that's one of the few, like, when I thought of Brothers, what I remember is the ending sequence, which isn't a hard sequence. Even compared with that game, it's not a hard sequence. It's really just, it was the narrative finishing part of it that was so powerful.
Yeah.
And that's what really, I guess it comes down to is I feel like for an action mechanics game, the boss battle is kind of like the cathartic close to the experience. Mm-hmm. And it's like narrative games, it's that reveal that, part of plot that's just amazing to listen to. It's kind of the same idea, it's just done differently.
Yeah, but there are plenty of games that still have a quote-unquote final boss that is narrative-driven, where it's like it's a part of the storyline. Not saying necessarily that the story's better for it, but there are lots of games that still
No, I'm not saying it can't. I'm just saying I think that's... Oh, okay.
Well, any of the Final Fantasy series for the most part.
I kind of agree with you, but Final Fantasy is a game that is almost entirely mechanics driven, though, in a way where it's like because Final Fantasy is a game where the bosses are static and they don't. It's not like they dynamically level up with you. Like
well, they do.
It depends on which Final Fantasy you're talking about. There are a couple where they are more dynamic. 8 is a classic example of that. The bosses scale with the level of your heroes.
I don't care about 8. 8
you
can
should.
die in a fire.
You should.
But no, what I mean to say is, so like in that game, at least the challenge of the game. I guess I don't know. I guess we're splitting hairs and going into semantics here.
Yeah, that's kind of where it's going.
So let's take a second and step back out of the weeds a bit. So what we're saying is, if you have a narratively driven game, maybe a boss battle isn't a requirement, but it's really something that you can't skip out on if you're having a mechanics driven game.
I just don't know what would be in its place that would give you that same feeling of closure that isn't a boss battle. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's how would you make something like that provides the
I
same
think the argument
experience?
could be the cutscene or the you were talking about earlier, the pseudo boss, where it's really just a scale up of everything you've been doing up to that point, where there's no real true boss in the area or level. It's just a culmination of everything you've done throughout the game.
Well, let me ask you this: do you need to have closure? Like, is that something where, like, there's lots of famous shows and famous movies where they don't always wrap up all the loose ends. You don't always get the closure you want, and that, in a way, that frustration it gives you makes the game, or makes that experience all the more delicious. But what I'm saying is, are we a spoiled generation that demands an end satisfaction at the end of all of our gaming experiences?
I
would it be
would argue
spoiled?
that almost all your gaming experiences end with some form of satisfaction,
Mm.
and that's part of the
gonna say-
reason why you play games.
Yeah, why would you play a game where it doesn't give you any satisfaction at the end of it?
Well,
Well,
I'm guilty of that. I've played games that give you no satisfaction, and I'm
Yeah.
mad at the end of them.
Yeah, that's why I just stop playing them. I don't finish it.
Well, no, and this is where it starts to fall more into the arena of narrative games, where it's more about conveying an experience or telling a story, and it doesn't necessarily need to give you this accomplishment feeling. It doesn't need to say, "Good job, you've mastered this," but rather it's all about the message that the game is trying to deliver to you. Does every message have to end with "Congratulations, you've mastered everything"?
Congratulations, you win!
Yeah.
And I think that is the fundamental problem in gaming nowadays, is people deciding whether that is true or not true, right? Because the division between what makes a game considered a normal game versus a game considered a casual game, a lot of the games that end up falling into the category of casual don't really have closure or an end to them.
But along those same lines, they at least maybe, like, there's like, if a game's easy and allows you to get to the final boss and beat the final boss, then is that a good game inherently? Because, like, does a game need to be super difficult to give you that satisfaction? And then this starts to now come into the question of, if every player has different skill sets and different abilities to play the game, how can you actually keep that same satisfaction across all your community?
Well, that's only if you're making a game that has to please an entire community, which I don't know many that exist that do that.
Well, but you have to try to, usually, right? Like, that's the whole game designer's trouble, is to make a game that can satisfy as many people as possible.
I don't know. I think most AAA would fall under that form. I'm seeing a lot of indie games made that aren't that are actually succeeding because of it.
Yeah.
You're getting into really deep water, because it's the whole thing of, it's like, I can go either way, because there's examples of both, right? There's examples of games I would consider a game that don't have a real, like, end boss sequence, and then the other way too, and it's the whole thing where you get into it when it's like, what is and what isn't a video game.
And I think, okay, so let me maybe try and say something here that maybe can bring some of our points some of our points together. So basically, you can't separate the end game, the boss battle. You can't separate the mechanics from the narrative, because both are tied to the player's satisfaction that they get out of the end of the game, be it the narrative's conclusion or the skill mastery, or however you choose to end your game. That final bit has to somehow usually give some kind of closure, unless you're doing some kind of abstract presentation.
Yeah.
So and then there's, I think, and there's a few games that escape that category, I think, like Swapper. In the Swapper, it's not really, it's a puzzle game. It still has a narrative that it's unfolding. There's really no boss battle, but, like, the final puzzles are kind of harder. So, like, that, and that's kind of the case in all puzzle games, I guess. Is that,
yeah,
it's
but I
final
would argue
level.
for the Swapper that it still has that cathartic ending to it, and that's the decision right at the end.
Yeah.
And that's, like, really what closes that game out really well.
Yeah, so I guess really what we're seeing is that there's a lot of indie games that are actually toying around more with finishing games without a definitive boss battle.
Yeah, and doing a damn good job at it.
Yeah, and so I guess that's kind of what spurred this whole conversation on in the first place, is, is it okay to end games without boss battles and just instead have a very poignant narrative ending? And I think we're starting to head more towards the way that it's possible.
I think the real answer to it is, if you are looking for some glorious master formula to determine what things need to be in something to make it a game and make it successful, then it's still probably in the realm of most games need to have some sort of end boss to help bring closure to the game. But if you're willing to go a little more, the road not traveled, then you can experiment a little more with not having that.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why the boss battle is so ever present is because in terms of designing a game that is like in a lot of your games, the formula is, there's some force that the hero has to struggle against, and ultimately there's some big main bad guy behind it, and that's the guy they have to get rid of to stop everything. And that's like the formula that so many games follow. And so it just naturally falls into boss is the final guy. And that's just because of the way that the story's unfolding. There's always some evil guy that's doing something, then you have to stop that guy, and that's that.
I would think if you took a lesson from looking at real life, in real life we spend a lot of time looking for like, who is this person that's doing this, or who is this person that we can blame the problems we're having on, and you can't always find that person because it's not always something that's truly as tangible. And games are a help escape from reality, so maybe that's part of the reason why the boss or the boss battle has always been popular in games, is because it's a way to give you that feeling of closure to it, or like, oh, this was all because of this,
to kind of give you the easy satisfaction that so often eludes us in life, to find that one single entity that is stopping us from having our happiness.
Correct. I mean, it's the same kind of thing you see in religion too. It's like, looking at some evil force to blame all of the world's problems on. People are always looking for that kind of thing, whether it's there or not.
Yeah, like those Chinese people. Oh wait, sorry.
Too soon. I don't know what you're referencing. I might have an idea, but I'm not saying.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's probably for the better. No, I had to throw in a joke because I was like, it's getting a little too philosophical in here. Gotta lighten up the mood a little bit. So okay, no, I think we've touched
Who
on
is
some good
this
points
Phil
there.
guy, and why is he sophical?
Oh, man.
Stupid goal. You're so stupid.
No.
Every time I talk philosophy with anybody, I'm like, oh god, I feel like I'm a douche. I feel like I'm a douche.
Well, to some degree, you probably have to be. I mean,
yeah.
Sorry.
It's like, do we need boss battles? Do we actually need it though?
No, we don't. We can phase it out and save money.
Well, no. See, now this sets up my my next point. So, if we're saying boss battles are a necessity, or at least they're
I would say
presence.
Commonality between games that helps that whole definition.
Yeah. So if we're saying that's
Majority
acceptable,
fall
that's
in
fine.
the category of having instead of majority don't.
Let's take this train on another track and start saying, how can we do proper boss battles, and ones that don't feel cheap, and ones that don't maybe make the player frustrated just because the game designer had to take the easy way out. So of the first things
I've got one.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, my most let me start over. My least favorite thing in most boss battles I ever do is the instant attack that you can't dodge.
Yeah,
that's like one of my least favorite things of all gaming. It's like, oh, this is a skill-based game. Oh, you can't dodge that. Oh, you can't dodge that one either. Good luck. It's like, okay. I just hate when games do that.
Do you have an example of something that's would not be considered a spoiler?
Not be considered a spoiler.
Oh, I know an example for you, because you were complaining so much about what is it, Ys?
Oh, E7?
Yeah, the one you had for PSP.
So frustrating. Yep, here's a dodge. Oh, but guess what? You get hit and half your health's gone. Sorry. Too bad it takes 500 hits to kill the boss. You're dead in 2. Bye. See you later.
Well, it's a skill-based game. Just don't get hit. Oh wait.
Yeah, that's the promise. It's like it is a skill-based game, and like YS, Oath and Felghana, and Origin don't do that, and it's great. It's a great games. That one not so much.
Now, couldn't you argue though that by adding the auto damage, it is making the game skilled in a different way? It's saying now it's not just a matter of dodging; it's a matter of killing someone fast enough, which is just making a different skill challenge.
It's one of those things that it's
skill challenge or grind fest, because that's the issue that he
is.
has with the game, and it's a legitimate one.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if you're gonna base your game around skill, because if you'd play a lot of YS, you would come to the conclusion that those bosses feel scary as is. They're scary, and when you fight one, it is an intense endeavor. And you don't need auto damage to make it more intense. It already is intense.
I was going to say, they're very catered towards learning. So you go in, statistically, most people aren't going to beat it in the first try. It could take multiple attempts for you to figure out the patterns of what you need to do and when you need to do it in order to beat it. And The problem comes in the fact that they put a mechanic in that requires you to be of a certain level in a game where leveling isn't supposed to be that important, except for, making the game easier to beat if you're having really hard time with an area, and then they suddenly make it a requirement by putting in attacks that can't be dodged, so you must be X level to have a health to survive through it.
Mm-hmm.
Or in this case, you have items. They give you items, but honestly, they limit the number you have. So it becomes, can you live through the damage with the items? And it basically forces you to have items to counteract it as well, which basically defeats the purpose of adding it in the first place.
But aren't items just another tool in your toolbox, just another skill you have to learn how to use?
No, not in this case, because it doesn't provide any benefit to you. So like most of the fights in YS7 were actually designed properly. It was just a few that I'm calling out here, and the last boss being one of them. And most bosses don't require it. If you're good enough at playing, you don't even have to use an item at all. And that's the most gratifying thing in the world. And that's how all of YS Origin and that's how all of YS Oath and Felghana operate. There are no items. You just have to do it based on your skill and your skill alone, really. I mean, there is leveling involved, but it's not a huge factor. But I felt like items were a crutch because they didn't want to design the boss battles properly.
So let me ask you something then. Final Fantasy VII.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good game. People like it. But in those games, item usage is expected.
Yeah, it is.
And bosses auto hit all the time. Like even your most common monsters can usually still auto hit you for damage. Like you can't escape it. But in those cases, player expectations are a little bit different, and they don't mind the items being a part of the skills/mechanics you're using in the game. Like that's item usage there is considered a skill as much as anything else.
So I wouldn't consider it a skill, but I mean, I don't know why you're.
I think he's getting at the timing of using items. So, like, certain items when used appropriately will make a fight easier. Like the case in example is the classic scenario where you're fighting something undead in a Final Fantasy game and throwing Phoenix down on it will instantly kill it. That's knowing how to use your items to make a fight easier.
Or even just a matter of like if you use your healing potions, like when you don't really need the full effect of it, or knowing when to use Phoenix Downs if you can survive through the fight without it. And like there's some different like knowing how to use your items in conjunction with your other abilities is sometimes a skill of its own. And there's enough items in Final Fantasy that managing all of them is I think you could consider it a skill. And if the game was easy enough that you didn't have to use items, that doesn't make the mechanic go away. It's just a mechanic you never really had to use until you were put into a scenario where you had to use it.
Well, I think the difference comes in how the game was made. In that game, there's a lot of randomness to attacks, and damage is pretty much all randomized. There's a lot of random factors to it. And those items are a way of hedging yourself against that randomization of effects. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And also in YS, there's no status. Well, there are status ailments, but it's not like the way they are in Final Fantasy. Where you have a poison where you need items to get rid of it, or a magic to get rid of it. You know what I mean? It's like the items in the game had much more of a purpose, and the game was designed with the items in mind. The problem I come with YS7 is it feels like they were an afterthought.
Okay.
It feels like they were there because they realized they put auto-hitting bosses in it, so they had to have some sort of item to get fighters through the game.
No, not to inflate your ego any.
But
that
was a game
maybe
with
is the
classes.
Case that you're just skilled enough that you never had to use it, where other people maybe for other people they had to use potions all throughout the game. So for them, it was just another continuation of the game.
So you're saying like they put it in as like as a guard for people who aren't as like good at that type of game? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it's still basically it became a mechanic that your more skilled players usually didn't have to use, but that allowed maybe less skilled players to make it through.
I know what you're saying, and I don't think you're wrong. I do think it can be a legitimate explanation for it.
No,
My
of course I'm not
usually
wrong.
The crutch.
The problem is they're using it as a crutch.
Though, is leveling. Is usually it's like if you know what you're doing and you're good at something, you can get through stuff at a much lower level. And if you're not sure about stuff, well, then you tend to grind a little bit more and get some more levels to give yourself a little buffer to make it easier to get through stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the modern quintessential game of that is Dark Souls.
I still need to play that.
Yeah, especially considering 2 is about to be out for consoles, and then a month later or it's already out. I can't remember.
I only care about it when it comes on PC.
Well, that's a month away.
That's sometime in April.
So I have a month
April
to beat
25th.
Dark Souls.
Yeah.
I'll get on that.
Just to expect to put it about how long, Eban, do you think for one playthrough on your first time? 80 hours? 100 hours?
I don't know. That's the problem. Is I haven't seen Andy play any of those kind of games, so
I'm amazing at everything, so just assume twice as
assume
fast as you.
optimal situation. It's gonna take you probably 60 to 80 hours easy.
Okay, so my goal is
And
to
that's
beat that.
assuming you
Rub
don't
it in
get
your
to a
face.
point where you hate what you did and start over.
Okay. I keep killing the blacksmith right away.
That's a good way to make yourself want to start over.
Yep.
Anyway, sorry. So we're getting a little off topic, but no, I think item usage in games can be integrated into the feel of the game. But like I think like Kadamus is saying is in a game where they're not used at all until that final almost seems like a justification for the auto damage, and it just comes. It seems like another game that kind of does that to me, which I totally dislike, is Witcher 2. And The Witcher 2 gives you this item system that you never use because it's
it's
cumbersome.
awful.
And you have it's just I hate using anything in Witcher 2. And there are some fights there's a certain boss fight that you have to use an item in. And it just I just don't like using items in The Witcher 2, and it feels like they're just like, use our mechanic. We want you to use this. And it's like, I don't want to use this.
Someone put it in and spent a lot of time on it, and it looks really cool. You have to use it once.
Have you ever played The Witcher 2 in particular?
Me, no, I haven't even touched.
Okay,
I think I might have watched you play a little bit of it, or you showed some of it to me. I myself, I don't even own it. I've never even played it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that they built this alchemy system because in this universe, all Witchers do alchemy, and they use alchemy to supplement their deficits to help them win battles. And so the game forces you to do alchemy and to use potions, which all have very relatively short time frames. You'll spend a minute, 2 minutes making potions, and they only last how long in game? Like 5
2
minutes?
to 3 minutes.
Yeah.
They
5
last
minutes
you as
at
long as it
most.
took to make them.
Yeah, and so you're spending all this time for a really short effect and that you have to keep doing repeatedly, and it's just really annoying.
And the problem is, it's a very cumbersome process to make them.
Yeah, it is.
And to drink them, you have to. It's not like you just quickly drink them. You actually have to kind of stop your game for a second. You can only drink so many before you get poisoned. And like, it's a very convoluted system. And
Yeah.
And the other problem is that game is not the kind of game where they let you really think a lot before you enter into certain like areas. Very often you'll just be walking and all of a sudden it's like, boss fight, go. And you're like,
And not only that, but you'll realize in the first boss fight, okay, well this potion would have been really helpful against this guy. But the problem is you can't go mid-battle and drink it to change the battle. You have to start over and drink it before it starts. So there's a lot of trial and error built into it as well. That's just not needed.
But
it's
not
a terrible
in
system.
a satisfying way, because Dark Souls again. There's a lot of trial and error in that, but it all ends up being fairly satisfying to me. Where what you're describing sounds very frustrating.
Yeah. And Dark Souls is one of the few games that treads that line very carefully, and they design it in a way they know that the game is frustrating. So a lot of the times, like boss battles in that game, you can beat them on the first try if you're really careful and you watch, movements and stuff. It's like, but in this game, it's not necessarily that way.
But isn't that kind of along the same lines? Like you almost have to watch other people play it like online or like.
No, you do. I mean, if you want the game to go faster, you look it up online. You
But
don't
I mean,
have
Even
to
if you
look
don't
it up.
want the game to go faster, if you want to prevent yourself from getting to the point of being frustrated, it's like watching someone else play or looking up guides or anything else with Dark Souls. I do not consider cheating in the least bit for that game.
No, it is not. It is.
So-
I consider it essential.
It is a legitimate part of playing that game, is going and looking stuff
So
up before
Kadamus,
you
I'm
do
gonna ask you a
things.
question.
Mm-hmm.
So you like Dark Souls, right?
I didn't say I liked it. I said I appreciate what they're going for.
Okay. I was about to ask you about Volgar the Viking.
I hate Volgar the Viking. But here's the thing, like, I hate it for a different reason. Because that's a pseudo-difficulty problem that we're going to bring up anyway, so we might as well do it now, I guess. And it comes down to what I consider checkpoint problems and how that creates artificial difficulty. So Volgar the Viking is a great, great example of that. That game is hard as hell, but it's fair, and the gameplay is fun, and it's really hard. Once you learn an area, it's really easy to get through it, kind of like Dark Souls. But the difference is in Dark Souls, you have checkpoints in the forms of bonfires, right? In this game, well, let's put it this way. There are checkpoints. There's one halfway checkpoint in every level. But let's say that you have to leave your house, so you quit the game and you go somewhere else. it will start you back at stage 1, and you cannot warp back to the stage you got to.
No,
you have to start
Yes,
from
you can.
step 1. No, you have to beat the whole world in one go.
I'm saying, so so if you beat, just to clarify, I know what you're saying, but to clarify, in Vulgar the Viking, like I think there's like 5 worlds total, but like each world's divided into 2 stages, and if you beat a whole stage, a whole world rather, sorry, so like you go through both stages of one level, and then you walk away and leave. When you come back, you can go to that start of that second level. But if you end before you finish the whole level, like if you end at like the halfway point, at the halfway point of the stage, you can't go back to that. That they don't save that.
And the problem is
like
like
silly, because that's the thing that's beautiful in
Yeah.
Dark Souls. You get up and you didn't, as long as you weren't in the middle of fighting something, or well, I never tried in the middle of fighting something, but you get up because you say, I'm done playing this for today. When you log back in, you are right where you left off at.
Yeah, exactly. And that removes a lot of the frustration of that game. Whereas in Vulgar the Viking, they're like, well, we wanted to design it like, they did it in the old days. And it's like, but is that a reason to not put checkpoints in?
I kind of love it though.
No, you say that, but have you beaten it? Have you played more?
And I love it. I love the fact that I haven't
That's a
beaten it.
stupid reason to like a game, Andy.
No, it just has to me, it has like, don't get me wrong, if it was any other kind of game, I would probably be like, this is balls. I hate this. But because it has that like He-Man, barbarian, like, I'm going to go rip people's shoulders off kind of feel to it, I'm okay with it punishing me more. And I just enjoy it more. Like, I can't explain it other than like, it's one of those things where like, because the game feels and looks the way it does, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it being hard as all get out.
I don't mind it being hard. That's why I'm mad at the checkpoint system and like how it deals with that, because not everyone has 2 hours to beat a whole world in one sitting.
Well, just get better.
That's not it at all. Even if you know what you're doing, it takes 2 hours.
No, I know. I totally agree with you. No, all I can say is
Obviously, you need to allocate your time spent playing video games more correctly. That way,
all I can say
play
is
that
the
one
game,
in 2 hours.
The game has me in its siren song, and I can't.
It does, and it's a stupid reason that you forgive it for things. That's
I
not a
don't
reason to
know.
forgive it for anything.
When you like a particular genre that you feel is being neglected, you'll like just about anything they give you.
Nah, I don't know about that. I haven't had a game
scratching
lately
that
that's...
barbarian itch for him.
Yeah.
I don't get me wrong. I agree that maybe like I don't see what harm it would have done to put the checkpoints like to allow you to save both in the middle of levels and at the end of levels. Like,
you know what the funnier part is? They don't so they build it that way on purpose because they wanted to give that idea. Well, that's fine, but couldn't you offer both options? One with a checkpoint system and one with not.
No, this almost falls into the category we talked about last session, where we talked about stealth games. And if some people like that enforced difficulty, people don't like to have. If people feel like if there's the option to do it easier, then the game's not really hardcore enough. And so, Vulgar the Viking, I think, is definitely a niche game, and it's meant for those people that get that kick out of that kind of form of masochism. And that's me.
It's like I like hard
you haven't
games.
Finished Dark Souls yet? Why?
I just haven't. I don't want. It's not that I'm afraid of the game. It's that I'm afraid what will happen to my free time.
Afraid of the game. It scares him. It's too dark.
It's too much souls.
The problem I found with Dark Souls, the ultimate reason I stopped playing it was because I found it not enjoyable to play by myself. I would have preferred to play it with someone else, and the co-op in that game is awful. Like, it just doesn't work.
I have high hopes that it is good in 2.
Yeah, because honestly, if 2 had really good co-op and it was really easy to play with people, and it wasn't a chore all the time, I would probably get it and play it and love it.
Okay, not just to kind of keep us on topic, because I know we're starting to talk about Dark Souls a lot, but to get us back on this whole boss fight / end level difficulty discussion. We are bringing up the point that sometimes designers will use spacing of checkpoints to give a pseudo difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other games for that fall in that category?
I was trying to. I just thought of one. Just give me a second to look for it. If you guys want to keep talking, I think I'll find it.
Yeah, so like you have games, of course, that go the complete opposite direction of this, where games like your BioShock Infinite, your Borderlands 2, where you just respawn infinitely and there's really you just keep going. It's like there's no such thing as a checkpoint. And so those games kind of go in the opposite end of the spectrum, and we already kind of talked about those in length in our first episode. But in terms of going the opposite direction, in terms of games that space you out a lot and make you swear every time you forgot to or every time you die, and you're just like, I gotta start back from that point, and you almost want to put the game down again. I'm trying to think of something that I think would be considered that.
Wait, this just happened the other night to me and my friend Bill Wilson. We we were playing Splinter Cell Conviction, and we're playing the co-op mode, which is completely separate from the story mode. And they have a section where you have to like do these 4 really intricate operations in a row with no checkpoints in between, and we kept dying on the 4th one and having to do all 3 previous ones over again every time.
Oh my god, I'm trying to remember what other game did that. It's just so frustrating.
And it's like you know, and the thing is, like, parts 1 through 3 were also difficult to do, and so it's like, why can't I have a checkpoint? Why do I have to do all this again?
I remember there was something I did where it was multiple people and you had to make sure everyone did it right, and then you always have the time where it's like going good, and then someone fucks up one thing and it's like, suck.
Yeah, and what do we call this when we discussed it, Andy? Is like the statistical probability of human failure or something?
Yeah.
Where it's like games they're spacing out checkpoints just because they know that eventually you will screw up and you'll have to start over, and that's difficulty, but it's not.
Yeah, basically, you've already mastered this task. Now they're just saying repeat it enough times that statistically you might fail, and that's not really the best way of doing things. Yeah, difficulty by statistical failure is what we came up with the other night.
Yeah, because Papa and Yo does that something fierce right at the end. Oh man, they're like, oh, that one jump that's really hard to make, and I counted 35 times in a row. You have to do it 35 times in a row, and it's like, it's not only boring, it's just frustrating.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about another way that game difficulty sometimes gets artificially simulated. And maybe I shouldn't say artificially, because that
can
makes
I
it sound like I
interject
already
for a
have a
second?
judgment. Sorry, what?
It felt like you said inseminated. I just
Maybe I did.
Well,
I
you
wanna
are
make
making
sure I
video
heard you
game
right.
babies.
How do we inseminate games with boss battles and difficulty?
I was gonna say, I think a lot of this case when you're running into this stuff in games, it's leftovers of a bygone era where we were more accepting to the abuse, and
But
they just continued doing it.
I agree that some of it's carryover, but I think some of it's just laziness of game design. And I think you see something. This next one you see a lot more, which is they increase the challenge that you find at the end of the game by removing some of your skills. The one that I'm going to talk about is a game that I mostly love, but the end is a little bit garbage, and that's Dustin Elysian Tale.
Oh God, that game. Oh.
I know your opinions on
I
it, but
still need to play it.
I think it's a great game, but except for the end, because not to spoil anything, but the whole game you're mastering your skills, you're increasing in strength, you're getting a little bit better because the controls are a little floaty, but they're meant to be, but you kind of get used to it as you play, and so the whole game you're constantly getting better with your skills. Well, the problem is at the end of the game, if they would have just let you continue to go as you were, the mechanics were such that you would just rape everybody because you would be great. You could just pick everybody up with your super windstorm thing and blow around them and kill them in the sky before they even touch the ground, and you'd feel amazing, but the game would be too easy. So what they did was they gave the enemies the ability to like auto block you regardless of what your orientation to them was. And I say that because earlier in the game, they introduced the idea that like you have to parry someone, but you have to be facing them in the right direction and you have to hit them at just the right time. So the game gives you this impression that, well, people can parry you, but they have to be good at timing and they have to face the right direction. But at the end of the game, they throw it out the window. At the end of the game, they say, well, enemies can block you almost like kind of once they like almost randomly. I've yet to find a rhyme or reason to it. But like I could be attacking someone a lot, and all of a sudden I get bounced away because they deflected my attack.
Even if they're facing the wrong direction.
Yeah. And I think they just did it because they couldn't let you do the crazy combos they were letting you do before. And they had to do that to kind of make it hard enough. At least in their mind, they had to do that.
Yeah, see, this is where I disagree with them, like, heavily. It's like, the way you make that game harder is more enemies. That's how the game was built. And that's how they did difficulty in that game up to that point.
Well, and I think the issue is if you follow the traditional difficulty skill kind of curve that games are supposed to follow, you shouldn't be removing skills from a player's arsenal to make the game more difficult. You should be expecting them to master skills in order to make the game the most difficult. And in Dust, one of the things you can do is you can use your wind ability to like grab like explosive fruits. And I know how that,
it sounds ridiculous, but
yeah. But anyway, it's something
Trust me, it works. He's a fruit ninja. Wait a minute, different game.
Yep, copyright claimed. Our video's down.
Yep. Oh.
Fruit Ninja, I'd like you to know, has made billions worldwide.
See, that gives me hope for the future. So I was saying that they introduced this whole concept of like this explosive fruit that you can kind of pull and throw towards your enemies, but they never really use that as like a good mechanic in any boss fight. All the boss fights are just kind of doing the same thing yours are doing, and they don't really ask you to master any skills in particular. And I think that's where Dust fails, is that it doesn't challenge your skills the way I think a traditional game should. And instead, to get that difficulty, they just start locking out some of your abilities that you've picked up as you've gone. Does that make sense?
I think your issue with it is because other games will do similar things, right? They'll give you a really cool weapon or something and then take it away from you. And I think you can do it in a way where it doesn't frustrate the player, but I can totally see what you mean when you feel like you're near the end of the game and they're doing that shit, and it's like that shouldn't be going on that close to the end. It's like that should be like a mid-game point or something.
Well, and like I'm okay with temporary empowerment, like Half-Life does it, where you get the souped-up gravity gun and you just start raping people, and that's just good fun. And
Good way to break up the monotony.
It's almost so ridiculous that you know it's not there to stay. and so you kind of accept it before you even get it taken away from you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
What do I need bullets for? I have this.
Where in Dust and Elysian fail. No. In that game, sorry, that was really bad.
It was so bad I didn't want to laugh at it.
I know. But in Dust, the world is built where you don't expect your ability to be taken away from you. And it's not even really like it doesn't make sense why it's taken away, because the world actually builds you up to expect the opposite. You're told parrying can happen, but only if they're facing towards you, only if the timing is just right. And all of a sudden now, all the bad guys you fight can instantly parry you, no matter what direction you're coming from, even if you already got them in the middle of a death combo. The game just totally breaks your expectations, and all for the sake of difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if anyone can think of any other games like that. I know there's like you mentioned, Gold. There were games that take away your weapons. There's too many games like that where you're fully loaded as a walking arsenal.
It's a fairly common thing, I think, particularly in FPS games or any first-person relative games where they'll take away a bunch of stuff in order to increase the difficulty for a section of the game. But usually it's limited, and then you usually get all your shit back. A little more frustrating when they take it away and you don't get it back, though.
So like Aerith in Final Fantasy, she just gets taken away.
And you never get her back.
Yeah.
I was really sad about that.
Spoilers.
Because she was my party healer.
Because Cloud drowned her.
Yeah, possibly.
I do like that. The idea of that.
But now that I'm thinking about that scene, I'm seeing what you're talking about, Cole, and it's in my head, and I'm like,
no, there was like an article or something we were talking about it the one night about it, I think, or something, or someone's like, yeah, Cloud actually is this murderer, and Cloud's a psychopath, and all this other stuff. Where it's like it's just looking at the game from a completely different perspective than what was assumed intended, and it's like all these other conclusions you can draw based on other things that aren't like completely explained in the game.
Yeah.
But I think that's a discussion for another time.
Definitely. I'm going down my list here, and I'm looking to see if there's anything else. We kind of already touched on it briefly about difficulty by numbers, and if that's valid. And Dust would almost feel better if it was done that way.
Yeah, it would. It'd feel great if it was done that way.
But some games also, it feels lazy just to be like, well, you mastered your skill killing these guys, now kill 1,000 of them, go. And, that almost feels like lazy game design to me in a way as well.
No, and my example of that when it comes to lazy difficulty by numbers is Darksiders.
Yeah.
It felt really lazily done in that game. It's like, oh, here's that one brute that was really hard. Well, now there's 2 of them. And you're like, oh, okay. And it's like, no, now there's 3 of them. It's like, oh, okay, I get where you're going. Let me guess, there's going to be 4 of them.
Now there's another one that is made out of all the other ones.
Yeah, it just felt really lazy.
No, I totally agree. That game was like Darksiders, the first one in particular. I didn't really play Darksiders 2 that much.
Same problems. It didn't change.
I don't really remember that, but I'm not surprised.
The thing with Darksiders was it always made it such a big deal, like, oh no, look at this guy, and you're like, okay, and you kill him, and you're like, okay, this is good. I feel good about myself. And then like almost instantly,
there's 2.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, and it's like it's not even so much that they're putting you into interesting situations. It's just it's almost like are you now strong enough to do this? And I guess there's a skill aspect in there, and it's like it's a little daunting. So it's like you get a little rush out of it, but it always did feel like lazy. And I guess the question is there a game where you can think of difficulty by numbers where it didn't feel lazy?
I think a lot of games where it ends up being like a time related thing. So like you have continuous waves in order to force you to continue forward in something because they want it completed in a certain amount of time or else it's impossible. Those don't tend to feel as lazy to me, even though it probably is a really lazy escape.
Oh no, and I can see that. And I guess in those situations it's not so much that the endless numbers is the challenge, but the surviving is the challenge.
Yeah,
It's,
and honestly,
it's not surviving to me. I always see it as a mechanic to push you forward because it's like if you stay here and try to clear it, you're never going to win because you can't clear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always saw it as a way of just not necessarily increasing. I always saw it as a way of increasing your perception of what state you're in. Like it makes you feel very insecure sometimes when there's timers attached to waves and stuff. It's like, oh God, what are they going to throw at me? Kind of feeling to it.
Well, I can understand where it's like it's empowering in a way, and I guess it depends on how you build the game. Because like to be able to blow through your enemies is that power fantasy, to just be like I'm destroying everybody. But there still needs to be some difficulty there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question is, so like I'm okay that if you throw a bunch of weak guys at me, but I still want it to be hard at the end of the day. And ideally, that difficulty isn't just because I have to wade through the bajillion guys that you threw in my way. I want something maybe there's a bunch of guys in a helicopter, and I don't care what it is, but just don't make me repeat the same task that I've been doing all game.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends. That's part of the issue too with it, though, is it depends on your mood and the kind of game and your expectations for that kind of game that you're in. Like you're more forgiving of it when it happens in certain genres, but when it happens in other games, it's like, come on, I play this game to get away from this. Why are you doing this to me?
Why?
Don't do it again, Dad. Wait, that's not good. Never mind.
Repressed memories. So difficulty by numbers. I think a lot of these things, it's like it really just has to be appropriate towards the story you're telling. And is it appropriate? Like in Dust, I think mowing through your enemies would have made a lot of sense. And then the final boss is a little bit more skilled, and you're like, okay, this is good. And in other games, if you have, if you want to make for example, for auto damage, I was talking to Kadamus about this the other night. I'm perfectly fine with auto damage from a boss if it makes sense with the narrative. If you're going to say that, if you set up the boss fight as a situation where you need to kill this guy because this like fire god's being reborn and these fire waves are shooting out from him as he's being reborn, you have to kill him before he gets out, then it's like everything then makes sense. And I feel narratively speaking, I'm okay with that then. I understand everything and I expect it to be coming. And I'm okay with it. But if you don't have it fit with the narrative and you don't have it gel with the world you're giving me, then don't do it just for mechanics' sake.
I just thought of another difficulty because it happened to me today that we could talk about too.
Sexual.
Randomization as a way to create difficulty. Okay, so
I think that shit almost always pisses me off.
Okay, so here's a good example. And I know this shouldn't bug me as much as it does, but right now I'm playing through Final Fantasy X again because they just did the remaster. Okay, and the first Blitzball tournament you play in, do you remember that?
Oh my God, there's almost no way to win that if I remember right.
No, okay, I looked up guides online, of how to win that battle, because there is advantages to beating that match. But really, the game doesn't want you to. It wants you to lose. And from a story perspective, it makes more sense to lose than to win. So it's like, I understand that. But how they did it is there's this huge tutorial about, these are how, the numbers interact with each other. This is how you calculate your win and loss rates. And it tells you this is exactly how it's going to work. And then in that battle, the rules don't apply. Because they add these huge randomization numbers to the whole thing. So it's this guy has an attack of 8. Well, I have an endurance of 10. I should be able to survive it. But then he magically did 20 damage to me because they can do up to 200%. It's like it takes all the fun of planning out of the game and completely ruins it.
That actually brings up my other big pet peeve in games, and also why The Witcher 2 is on my dirty list, is when games give you a scenario where they're like, you can win, and either you really can't, or more annoying still is when you actually win and they cutscene you losing. It happens 2 or 3 times in The Witcher 2, I think.
Yeah, it happens actually quite a bit.
And you're they put you in a fight that's supposed to be a little challenging, but you can win it, and then you win it, and then they give a cutscene where the guy kicks your butt, and you're begging for mercy, and it's what? Why did you even bother to have me fight if the goal was for me to lose?
Yeah.
I don't know. It comes back to that whole thing too, where it's some games, where you can't win the fight, you're supposed to lose the fight. And like, does it bother you in that case? Because I mean, at least in that case, you did lose, so the cutscene makes sense.
Yeah, like I'm okay with that because like Mega Man X, old game.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the perfect example of that ideology.
Mega Man X in the intro stage, you get your butt kicked, and it's fine because
he kicks your ass in the fight.
Yeah, and it's like I'm okay. At least then you didn't give me the false hope, like, oh look, you won, good job. Oh wait, just kidding, you actually lost. Because then it's like you gave me something and snatched it out of my hands.
What you thought you were playing was actually this coma fantasy. That's how bad your ass got kicked.
I just shake my hands in the air at the game, like, you thief of the world.
Okay.
I tell you, that's my biggest pet peeve. Whenever that happens, I want to just burn everything.
So, closing thoughts, Eban. But because basically that's my way of saying that we've kind of hit time.
Gotcha.
Goal, you're taking too long. I'm gonna fill in for you.
Yeah. Skip me. Come back. Pass.
No,
I can do
boss
that.
battles.
It's a game.
Boss battles are super tricky. I'm not gonna pretend they're not. There is a reason why not everyone can just be a game designer. But that being said, there are things that even the uneducated layman can understand. And in this case, we pointed out a few of them and tried to analyze what makes a good game, what makes a bad game. And I think what we've basically come down to is we can give you a little bit of slack if it makes sense narratively with your game. But even that has its limits sometimes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, your narrative can buy you leeway one way or the other, but don't push us.
All right, I got my end note.
Okay.
I would like to see more super bosses in video games.
Really?
Yes.
I want to see
Super
no
bosses?
super bosses in Billion.
Yes.
Is this like you tape 5 bosses together and then make you fight them, or?
No. Because I told you earlier, I was looking up for the discussions and stuff and that, and that actually is a category of boss as defined by Wikipedia, and it relates to any boss in a game in which you do not have to fight. They're all completely optional.
Like the
but
weapons
you choose
in
to
Final
fight
Fantasy?
them for
I
some
love
other
those.
reason. What?
The weapons in Final Fantasy, I love those.
Yes, that is the prime example they give. Ruby and Emerald weapons.
I would love more of that too.
I think that is something that people can add to games to increase the length of games without making the game feel bloated and long.
One, and it doesn't, like, those boss battles are pretty cheap, but the fact that they're completely optional is like, okay, it's like, if you're going to try and do this, it's on your own. Be aware that this game does not adhere to the rest of the normal stuff that you see in the game.
Well, it's like when you play them too, the game pretty much tells you that these are going to be bitches.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it says this is going to be awful, but it's optional. And you're like, oh, okay, well, if I don't like doing it, then you know what? I turn the other way and enjoy the rest of the great game that's there.
So I think, because it does relate to bosses. They are bosses in their own rights and that. And if you're going to put bosses in games, I think including a few of those can be a great way to, fill out your game and give the whole appealing to both audiences, the people who want a really good experience and the people who want something that's really difficult and hard.
Yeah.
With a good payout.
Kadamus, do you have any closing notes?
I like bosses. I love
like a boss.
As shown by your love for, damn it, now I can't think of it.
Ease.
Men?
As you both just start naming stuff that's not what I was thinking of. Shadow of the Colossus.
Oh, man, yeah. It's like, it's one of those things that I feel like it's a really good way to end and test the skills that you've built up. And even in a Final Fantasy, the reason those boss battles are fun isn't necessarily because they're difficult. They usually aren't. But it's a matter of it's that closure to the story that you've been doing for the last 40 hours. It's still that closure that's so important that you need to have. And that's why I like them so much. I like that end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Except when they're pissy and really annoying.
So you like them except for when they're not easy.
I like bosses when they're designed properly.
When they're designed for babies.
When they're oh yeah, of course you're gonna say that.
No, I'm just yanking you, Shane. No, I understand. Like, the boss needs to be it needs to be challenging, but not because of any of the reasons we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
It needs to follow the natural skill difficulty kind of curve of any game.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been the Alpha Build Podcast. If you have any boss battle moments you want to share with us, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Make sure that you subscribe and like and favorite and do all those kind of things. And we'll be back next time. Until then, thank you for listening. So long.
Bye.